I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello and welcome to the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. I'm here with my very special guest today. I got Doug of Good Times, Great Movies, an 80s podcast, which I've grown to love over time because we have a lot of crossover because I talk a lot of obscure 80s movies and he's at a podcast dedicated to nothing but. So Doug, welcome to the Cultworthy. Let's hear about your show, man.
Well, thank you for having me. It really is a pleasure being here. The show, we're coming up on 10 years somehow.
I know.
I don't, I think it's that my co-host and I set such a low bar for ourselves. We're like 2 a month, we can do that. And because we did that, we've been able to stick with it since 2015.
Right. I mean, I was aware of your podcast before I even started podcasting. I'm on my way to year 4 now. Okay. But I remember like seeing your little Instagram reels and stories of just saying this week on Good Times, Great Movies. And eventually I was just like, I need to start listening to this show. And then like, okay, well now I got to get this guy on because he's covering movies that I want to cover or have covered. And I like their point of view of these movies because much like my show, you guys aren't strictly a shit talking podcast.
Right,
it's more of like a discovery, get people excited about something they might not have seen. But there's also ones, and I'm covering them on my other show too. There's also those ones from the 80s that you just like, you can't find redemptive qualities to them, right?
No.
Therefore, it's almost like a warning. Do not watch this movie.
Oh, of course. I mean, there are a lot of those movies out there and you know, you're aware of them. This podcast for me, it's really been a discovery. We will hit some mainstream titles. Yeah, you want to listen to us talk about 3 Men and a Baby? Yeah, it's on there. But we haven't talked about Ghostbusters. We haven't talked about Goonies. Have we talked about Ghoulies? Of course we have. So,
right.
And it really is like digging around and finding things that I had only heard were terrible or things that I had never heard of before. And sometimes that's some of the most amazing films that we cover are ones that I had never heard about. Like Can't Stop the Music, that bizarre, like Village People, quote unquote, biopic. I was blown away and I found it wildly entertaining. I don't think my co-host felt the same way, but I
Who
really
would have
enjoyed
known that Steve Guttenberg was such a good roller skater?
Who knew? Who knew? No, but it's absolutely been a blast. Sometimes I refer to it as us just, taking the piss out of 80s movies. And I think we do it in a way that isn't mean-spirited. We'll kick everything around, whether it's amazing like RoboCop or whether it's the film Rappin'. Same level. We treat them the same.
Well, and that's why my show is called The Cultworthy. It's because I think there is this lost gap of time with newer generations where until streaming became a thing, they did not have the access to late night cable shows like we did when we were kids, the Blockbuster, not even the Blockbuster. I'm talking like the mom and pop video store that would stock things that Blockbuster didn't want because they were trying to keep more mainstream things on the shelf. So when we talk about like the Full Moon Features movies, the Charles Band movies, stuff like that, that's the kind of stuff that deserves a rediscovery. And so Cultworthy started off as a blog where it's like I was going back and finding these movies and it's like, I don't hear about these in the cult circles. Are they worthy of being a cult film? And that's where I kind of come from.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, you and I are from, I assume, a similar generation, but, USA Up All Night, that was so important to me when I was younger. and just waking up at 2 a.m. and there's something playing. Some of those movies feel like a fever dream and just occasionally stumbling across them again to realize, no, these were real. Like these were actual films that they would play late at night for, I'm going to say, horny teenage kids half the time or kids that were into blood and guts and gore. While they cut some of it out, you still got the point of it all.
You got the point of it. And what it did for me, for example, I've told this story maybe too many times on the show, that USA Up All Night is how I discovered Chopping Mall. And it wasn't until I saw the uncut version of Chopping Mall where a lot of the jokes they cut out made sense. And I was like, oh, that makes sense now. She takes her top off. She tastes like pepperoni. I get it now. And so that might have been the catalyst of me trying to find the real versions of these movies that they had to edit for content on USA Up All Night or Night Flight.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we get into the conversation of tonight's movie, which this is for October, this is our horror month, and this is the perfect movie for you to have brought to this conversation. But before we get there, what was the most challenging film do you think you guys had to cover of your whatever 240 something episodes? I think
I'm not going to say a particular film. The comedy genre is difficult to talk about. It really is. It's difficult to make fun and have fun with a movie that is trying to be funny. And whether it's a successful comedy or not, it's still difficult to do. Like it really is. It's kind of difficult to kick around a comedy. All you can say is like, oh, that joke didn't work. And you're just repeating jokes that they did on the film. Those are the most difficult movies to cover. And it again has nothing to do with whether they were successful or not. Most recently, we did See No Evil, Hear No Evil, which is a terrible movie. It's really bad. It's wildly unfunny, just stuffed with people that are very talented.
Right.
But it was real difficult to talk about going, yeah, this joke didn't work. This joke didn't work. Okay, they're doing the blind gag again. Those are the most challenging things because it doesn't matter if the film is wildly successful and known, to a 20-year-old. A 20-year-old knows some of the movies that we've talked about.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a movie like that or something that is buried underground and as you said, just like a full moon deep cut. That stuff's pretty easy to talk about. Comedies are really difficult.
I think there's also because there's that stretch of time, like since you cover 80s, we'll say 80 to like maybe 84, 85, before like the blockbuster era happened, right? We got all of these spring break beach comedies that had a few jokes, but it was mostly excuses to get people in their bathing suits or out of their bathing suits, and it's funny because like some of those I'll watch again and I can see like, okay, there is the nostalgia goggles for some of them of like, oh, remember when times were simpler where stuff like this would be considered like assault now? It should have been back then, but in those films, it's joke worthy.
Yes.
It's an interesting time, and I'm not defending it. I'm saying that, wow, how we progress as a society and a cinema going society too, and what is right and what's wrong, I still haven't figured it out because violence is totally cool.
Right.
But when I was a kid, sex was fine, but violence was bad. It's so crazy how it changes.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's something that I don't want to say my co-host and I struggle with because we have never even talked about this, but just trying to walk that tightrope of, okay, what was appropriate in 1983 and how often do we point that out in our podcast and do we get hung up on that? We really try not to. And when you were just talking, I did realize probably the worst movie we ever talked about on the podcast was a movie called Party Camp. It is.
Ooh, I haven't seen that one.
No, it was really difficult to find a very grainy cut on the web. And like you said, it's a boob comedy, but strangely enough, without boobs. So you don't even have that. Like it's really tiresome and the jokes are bad. And I don't think there's anyone who made a name for themselves in that movie. That was really tough. So feet to the fire. I'm going to say that one.
Going to go on the watch list now because I love a good dumpster fire.
Oof, man. Yeah. Good luck.
Okay. So tonight we are discussing a superior sequel, in my opinion. Like we have this killer sequel series I'm kind of doing, and this was perfect for Halloween because I sent you the list and you chose Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2. And I did a backflip because this movie is bonkers. I'm not going to say it's a good movie, right? Because that's subjective. I'm going to say that this movie takes leaps that movies of its time were not taking. And I feel like it would work a lot better in today's climate with its mix of comedy, sexuality, but also we've seen a lot of movies follow a lot of these same kind of plot points, and we'll get to those in a second. So what was your reason for choosing this film?
Well, I thought you were going the direction that I'm about to go when you said, I wouldn't call it a good movie. I'd call it a great movie. I really would. I love this film.
I do too, but I have to be careful with my verbiage.
Oh, of course. No. It's not without its flaws. It's not without its faults, but I think that's half the charm of this movie. I think this thing is taking huge swings and connecting with the ball more often than not. Visually, it's stunning, and it shouldn't be visually stunning as it is. A lot of the practical effects are they're fantastic, and they're not things that well, you know what? We're going to compare it to other films, I'm sure, because you can see so many influences in this movie. But just because something, pulls from other films, that doesn't necessarily make it bad or make it tired or anything like that. This was a movie that I discovered through my podcast. I had always heard of it. I had never seen it until probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I wouldn't even say I'm a fan of the original Prom Night. It's fine. I'm
not at all. Yeah, I'm not at all.
I think the film gets a little bit too much hate. The dancing scene gets a little too much hate. That's a film that's totally fine for what it's doing for the era in which it exists. This is so much better. This is the step from 1 to 2 is so big, and I can't think of a whole lot of other movies that have that type of sequel step up that this does.
Right. And we'll get to that in a second. But first, we need to let people know what we're talking about. So cue dramatic music. The year is 1957, and Mary Lou Maloney is about to be named prom queen. However, we learn that the title does not match the attitude, as Mary Lou has no regal tendencies whatsoever. She is cold, ruthless, and always gets what she wants. After breaking the heart of her beau Billy Nordham, just before the crowning ceremony, he chooses revenge and climbs the catwalks of the auditorium with the intention of igniting a stink bomb during the crowning ceremony. Tragedy ensues, however, as the fuse sets fire to Mary Lou's prom dress and burns her alive in front of the entire school. Cut to 30 years later, where we meet Vicki Carpenter, a student at the very same school where Mary Lou was roasted alive. She wants to attend the prom in a beautiful new prom dress, but her religious zealot of a mother shuts it down, causing Vicki to dig through the prop room of the school's basement, only to uncover the remaining relics of that fateful night, and unleashing Mary Lou's trapped spirit under the school. Chaos ensues as Vicki and her friends are tormented by the dead prom queen's lust for revenge in director Bruce Pittman's Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2. So I think the first thing we have to say of how this movie does take such a huge leap from part 1 to part 2 is that it wasn't intended to be part 2. Do you want to fill us in on that?
Well, I think it was originally called Hamilton High. Was that the original title?
That's The Haunting of Hamilton
High.
The
Haunting of Hamilton High, which again isn't a great title either. That's not great. It's not going to stand out. And you don't need, that's the thing. We don't need any connection to the first one. You really don't.
No.
It's totally fine. Have this on its own. If you had to title this a sequel to generate interest or to make money or anything like that, it's totally fine. But this has no connection to the original film whatsoever.
It doesn't. The only reason why it became Prom Night 2 was because MGM had bought the companies that made it, and they just had it in their licensing. And they're like, oh, well, how about this? Hamilton High was the name of the high school in Prom Night 1, and we have a movie called The Haunting of Hamilton High. Let's just make it Prom Night 2. There's no connection whatsoever in the characters. There is, we'll get to that in a little bit, but it's kind of forced in there. But I think the biggest part about the whole thing is that they just took the advantage of having a high school being named the same high school. And when we look at this time, when this film came out, supernatural high school horror wasn't as big as slashers, right? Like Nightmare on Elm Street was like the only one that was really playing in that game. Everything else was boogeyman, masked man, slasher. So it wasn't the right era yet. So taking that leap, trying to connect it to a slasher, not a bad idea for partnership. But when you think about if you're going to a slasher sequel and it's not a slasher, well, no wonder it didn't make any money and was kind of like buried in the video market.
Right, exactly. And to, but I would even refer to this as a slasher. You know, you mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street. There's a lot of parallels to the Nightmare films in this one.
Maybe too many, but
Right.
done creatively.
Don't say too many. There can never be too many Nightmare parallels in any movie. I want to see them in everything that I watch, honestly.
I like it. I want to see more meatball faces on pizzas.
That's right. Exactly. Tom Arnold and Roseanne should be in everything. Every sequel, let's say.
One of the things that I think is the very first takeaway from this movie is the fact that we start with our main character, Mary Lou. But for a movie named after her, she's only in 6 minutes of the film. We are dealing with the spirit possessing another character throughout the whole movie. But I gotta say that performance of Mary Lou at the beginning and at the end, it almost feels like she's in the entire movie because it's such a powerful performance. And this goes to my main point about this topic is that the acting in this movie is so good for its genre, it's almost mind-blowing. Like, we don't get stale wooden actors in this movie. Even like the slasher fodder characters are good. It really adds to the prestige of what this movie pulls off.
The performers in this movie have no right being as good as they are.
Agreed.
Her friend Jess, the girl with the punk hair,
Yes.
her performance in that bathroom scene, that is almost as if she's picturing herself at the Academy Awards watching that scene being played while she's nominated for Best Supporting Actress. It's amazing, and it could be in any film. It does not even need to be in this film. And as you said, top to bottom, everyone is really invested. Everyone is really giving it their all. Her mother, of course, come on, Michael Ironside.
Michael Ironside, yeah.
Like,
Well, that's how you know this movie's Canadian, because Michael Ironside's in it.
yeah. Oh, well, that, and I don't know. This movie does not shy away from the fact that it's Canadian. This movie
Canadian
could not
money
be
in
more
it.
Canadian.
It's true. Yeah, and it's funny too because like when I think of Canadian horror, everyone goes to Cronenberg, right? Like that's kind of the captain of the Canadian horror movement. But this film was often compared by people that actually, praised it and cherished it as the blue velvet of horror films for the 80s. Now, I can kind of see where they're going with that, with like a lot of the personality conflicts. There is like a lot of, I don't want to say like Laurel Palmer vibes to some of these characters. I can see that. I wouldn't say it's as much blue velvet as I would say there's a lot more of Nightmare and Evil Dead.
And for something that wasn't a big hit and a lot of people didn't see, some of the set pieces in this film are wild and great. Right. Like the chalkboard scene, of course the rocking horse, but as you mentioned before, like this film should feel overstuffed, and it doesn't. It strangely enough, it feels economical. But if you think about her mom, her dad, what is going on with her friends, the fact that there is some sort of prom queen nonsense on the line, which means absolutely nothing in this movie. Like it should feel meandering and overstuffed, and it doesn't. Like there's no wasted space. There's no wasted time in this movie. This is something that I really do appreciate. Like, when I was maybe like 10, ish years ago, probably a little more, when I was watching a lot of Bergman and stuff like that, I would hear people talk about like, oh, a movie's boring. And I would think, what a horrible argument. Like, that's so dumb. Like, you just don't get it. And as I'm going to say matured, but that's a great argument. If you're bored watching something, it's probably not worth watching. At no moment Am I bored? Am I checking my watch? Am I wondering what's going to happen? Or am I thinking about something else to do during a moment of this film?
I love that you said that, because that's one of my biggest debates that I have with my co-host on the Siskel and Ebert podcast. Is he's an actual film critic. I am not. I do not call myself a critic. I've seen more movies than him, but I am more about the experience. And so, like, my biggest argument with him when we have these discourses is, at what point do you, as a film goer, as a watcher, as an appreciator, there is a moment in a film, and you'll recognize it if you know what the film's doing, where you stop watching it as a narrative, right? And then you start taking it in as an experience. That's what David Lynch movies do, right? Because narratively, they're not strong. If you're going in for like a A, B, and C story, you're not going to get it. So you have to be responsible for your own point of reference, where like, okay, I'm switching from narrative brain to experience brain. I'm going to let this be a submersive, immersive experience. And that's what this film kind of does, because it unfolds, like you said, so many stories into one movie that you should feel like it's jumbled, but it doesn't feel jumbled. It's taking its time with the kills. It's not just throwing kill after kill after kill. It's building moments and reasons, yet it doesn't feel dragged out. When you use the word economical, that was probably the best way to explain it. It's like, you got 90 minutes to make this movie. How are you going to tell this story and have the violence and have the kills the most economical fashion without wasting time?
Exactly. I mean, there's a handful of kills in this movie, but this is something where at the end, if you told me that 20 people were killed, I'd believe you. I'd be like, oh yeah. No, it was a nonstop thrill ride. I'm sure there's death around every corner, but then you go through and you're counting on your hand. You're like, oh no, actually there weren't that many people that died.
Well, and it also plays the hits too for people that were aware of the films culturally. Like, it has its Carrie moments, right? Mm-hmm. It's got the prom queen stuff. We've got that beast of a Lady Kelly who's like wanting to be the prom queen, and what she does to it. She may as well be the Nancy Allen character, right?
100%, yeah.
And she kind of does have her John Travolta character as well. And I'm not going to say that Vicki is the Carrie, but her parents, especially her mom, is definitely like the Piper Laurie, not as, erratic, but that leads to something further down the road, a taboo moment, which we'll get to, I'm sure. It almost sets up that moment early in the movie, like where you think that it's going to be a Carrie and the mom's going to be her biggest obstacle in the movie. She's not. That whole thing is built up just to deliver that punchline later, and it's perfect. Like, it is not what I expected at all the first time I saw it. And so when they bring that in, it's really to represent how much this demon has possessed innocent young Vicki, and how it's making people like really like, what is going on with Vicki? Like, there's just so much going on.
Yeah, and I think I love this film. I think it's fantastic. But earlier, before we even started recording, you're like, you know what? If there's things that are a problem, point them out. And I'm going to point out one, and I think this is a huge issue with this movie.
Yeah,
it's when Vicki changes, because still great. The actor's doing a fantastic job, but you hear things. You hear classmates being like, did you see Vicki? Can you believe Vicki? She looks the same. She's not dressing any different. Right. She was modestly dressed at the beginning. I believe she should be dressed like Olivia Newton-John at the end of Grease. Like, that's how she should look. Like, that's it. You want her to look like she's from that time period? Amazing. You want a transformation? Do it. I think that would be a larger impact, and that would turn heads, and that would be a little more interesting than just, she's not even wearing a poodle skirt. Like, no, fine, you want to do it? Do that, I guess.
But also, I think there is a motive for Mary Lou to almost remain incognito.
Sure.
So, Michael Ironside doesn't suspect, or the priest, because there's a whole plot point there too, where Michael Ironside and Billy the priest, or Buddy the priest, they were involved in that incident back in 1957, and now one's a priest and the other is like the principal of the school. So they have all those years of guilt and fear on their shoulders. And to see them arise, when at the end of the day, those really kind of are the targets, in my opinion. So she doesn't want to be too inconspicuous. Yes. I just do want to say that there's something I did appreciate about the second watch that I didn't really notice before, and that is how well it does stick to the lore of demon possession, very much like The Exorcist does, where the spirit of Mary Lou essentially abuses the shit out of Vicki before she full on possesses her, because that's how they're supposed to work, is they have to break down your will and your spirit and your sense of survival in order for you to be weak enough for them to take you. And they do it quickly, but between the editing and the performance of Vicki, it really, really works, where it's like this girl's kind of being beaten down and then whoosh, possessed.
So are you talking about the Stranger Things moments in this movie? Is that what we're referring to?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
A little bit. I could say that for sure, yeah.
Again, I think that is done so well. And I don't know, movies around this time, you were talking about how it does pull, of course, inspiration and influence from other films. These sort of bizarre, creepy dream sequences or sort of like mirrored worlds or anything like that. I can't really think of anything around this same time where that was happening, but I could be wrong. Did that remind you of any other film that was made before this or around this same time?
I think that the dream states are supposed to be kind of like a wink to Nightmare on Elm Street, what Wes Craven was doing. But mostly what I think it's influential to is Silent Hill.
Oh,
because I had just had this conversation, I think just the episode I recorded before this, about Jacob's Ladder, how a lot of us geek heads think that Jacob's Ladder was one of the main influences on creating the world and the demonic underworld of Silent Hill. But going back and watching this one, like as she's kind of being sucked into the netherworld by Mary Lou, she's essentially in the Upside Down. Like we're looking at the ghostly remnants of 1957's high school. And you've got the undead. You've got like this, it almost looks like it could be a post-apocalyptic version of the high school where everything's been graffitied and the light is dark. Like you are in a different dimension and realm. And rewatching it, that was the first thing I thought. I'm like, oh my God, this does feel like Silent Hill. Like the gong goes off and whoosh, now you are in the Upside Down. So, and I got other ones too later on as in the conversation, but I'd say that was one of the biggest takeaways that I took from those scenes is like, okay, this is an influential mark on a huge franchise, and everyone knows that franchise, but not a lot of people know this.
Yeah, I am surprised by I don't want to say the lack of discussion around this movie, but I've never heard anyone reference it. For the amount of influence I see in later films and TV shows and everything like that, I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about this film.
Yeah, neither have I. Just maybe a couple other podcasts. And,
yes.
That's one of the things how I think I got to saw it. Because I remember this movie always like on the video shelf. I remembered the poster. It's a very recognizable poster. I don't think I actually watched the movie until How Did This Get Made did it. And I was like, I really got to go watch that movie because I didn't want to listen to the pod until I watched the movie.
Sure.
So I watched the movie for that. And I was like, why have I been sleeping on this? This is bonkers. And they say their things in the comedic way about it. But I think at the end of the day, they also agreed, like, why was this movie way better than we expected? And that's how I felt too. And, now it's something I watch on the reg.
Yeah, I really do. I watch this movie way more than I should.
So as we're talking about the Mary Lou isms that attack Vicki, let's talk about that performance really fast because Wendy Lyon as Vicki, this is a performance that really just kind of blew me away. The Sissy Spacek, the Carrie, the meek, really religious mom, and dad to a sense, but we'll get into that later. The dad is more of like a cuck. The dad is just very subservient to the mom's authority of the household. And she has the popular friends, but are they her friends? Like, she really is just attached herself to people socially. And then Jess is like her best friend who has that crucial moment in the bathroom and then dies because of messing with Mary Lou's stuff, which that sets Vicki off into like this next set of character development that does happen quickly, but it's believable all the way through. Like the way she can just give us that journey of demon possession and then becoming the possessed and having that sultry, sexy attitude, it honestly disturbs me how much that tonal shift is, because you like Vicki at the beginning, and then to see her become not only a killer, but in that now infamous shower scene where she does full frontal nudity and stalk and hunt Monica throughout the bathroom, well, now she's an absolute predator and she scares the shit out of me. Being able to take a person watching a movie on that emotional journey where you've made a connection with someone that you like, and then it almost like rips it away and turns them into a monster. Oh my God.
I agree. I agree to a certain degree, because I still like Vicki when she is possessed. I still find her, and maybe it's because on the outside she is still Vicki.
Mhm.
I still find her somewhat charming, and where I did not like Mary Lou, like that Mary Lou character is horrible. We're
She
introduced to
is.
her early in this film. She's a terrible, terrible, awful character. But I think her inhabiting this pretty sweet girl, I think the quips work better. I
Yeah.
kind of found myself a little more entertained and a little more on her side than in the opening scene of this film.
No, I like that a lot, because what it does is it kind of makes me feel like, okay, so if you are possessing a person, you're not just instilling your whole personality and mannerisms into this person. You are now a symbiote with
Mhm.
this person's
No, I get it. Yeah.
cuteness and likeness. And even if that's not the intention of the script, it plays that way in the performance, which just makes it that much better.
Yes, exactly. I mean, of course, I feel bad for her friend that she like squishes in those lockers. Yes, of course. I'm not rooting for that poor girl to die, but I'm kind of into it. Like I'm enjoying this cat and mouse, and it could have gone either way. If her friend got away, great, fantastic, happy for her. Hope she lives an amazing life. But the way it works, I'm kind of satisfied with that as well.
And I don't know, I project sometimes not knowing what a filmmaker's plan, or, how he's going to reference this for the audience. But the way I took that scene of like, we see both girls naked in the shower, and then there's like an almost moment of experimentation between the two of them. As Monica runs away, realize that she's in danger, she towels up, she covers up, and so she is being chased by a fully nude Vicki. I kind of like the juxtaposition in that, because it almost feels like it should be the opposite. Where you're too afraid to cover up, and so I think under the guidance of a traditional horror film or Schlockmeister, it would be the opposite, where the victim is the one who's in like the most exposed state of
Sure.
being as they're
Yes.
being stalked, but it's the opposite.
But it's because I think it's because it's Mary Lou. It's
Right.
Mary Lou. She's
She has
promiscuous. She doesn't give a shit.
she has no reservations.
She'll run around naked. This isn't even her body. Who cares?
Right. It's just like a meat truck. Like she's
Exactly.
just guiding this thing around. So now talking into like influences of this one, did you happen to have any moments of recognition as I watched this last time? And I recognized it the first few times I saw it too, that nude stalking through the locker room, I feel was very, very influential on Robert Rodriguez's The Faculty, where at the end, she's stalking Elijah Wood through the locker room of the high school, nude, and it even does the same shot where you're under the lockers and you just see her bare feet walking past the hallway. And I went back and watched it on YouTube. I'm like, yeah, it's almost the same thing. So never heard him say it, but I cannot say that he did not at least have some kind of influence from that moment, because it's a great moment in horror and you never see it talked about.
That's pretty great. I mean, the only thing I will say is covering a lot of horror movies from this basic time, that is
Yeah.
something you see a lot. I mean, we just talked about Death Spa recently,
Oh,
and you kind of, even in that film, you see a very similar locker room type scene.
Truth. Yeah, I think there's something about the editing, the pacing, and those feet walking underneath it. I'm like, that looks so familiar. I kid, might be me projecting,
Oh,
but I like it.
what I really love about this, and it could have been a budgetary thing, I'm not sure. It's so brightly lit. most of the time in those kind of locker room, I don't know, cat and mouse scenes, it's dark, and that's supposed to build tension. I love the fact that it's just those big, bright high school fluorescents over them the entire time.
That's a point that I did not recognize in the movie, but it's something that I've talked about recently too, where it takes a very confident horror filmmaker and production to do horror with the lights on. One of the reference I often use is Ari Aster's in Midsummer, where Hereditary, everything was in the dark. Midsummer, everything's in the brightest daylight you could ever imagine in a horror film. And it makes me appreciate when horror films leave the lights on. And this one does. If it's not in the big, brightly lit prom scene, it is in a well-lit crafts room. It is in the extremely well-lit locker room, in her bedroom with the demonic rocking horse that licks its chops. Like, I love it when horror movies leave the lights on. Great point.
Yeah, so do I. And also what's great about that scene, the sort of arts and crafts scene, like, I don't know how she was in there, I guess, after hours. I mean, we don't need to poke holes in this, but also the locker room scene, that's taking place in the middle of the day. School is still in session. And I think that is pretty wild because, again, you do tend to see these think about almost any episode of Buffy where something tense with vampires was happening at that school. It was after hours. It was dark. It wasn't really happening with students and faculty roaming the halls.
One thing I love about that scene in particular, and it's like the first real kill scene of the movie, is that Mary Lou is such a petty beast that not only does she attempt to hang and strangle poor Jess, then she attempts to chop her head off with a paper block cutter.
Oh.
And for good measure, after all is said and done, she throws her out the window.
Throws her out the window.
Like, she's already dead, but she just still throws her out the window.
And I feel like that makes up for the tease of that paper cutter, because that cutter tease, that is something I wanted to see so badly.
Right. Like, who hasn't grown up in a high school or a middle school and seen one of those things and be like, oh my God, what if you could cut off your hand with that thing?
Oh yeah.
And then they use it as like a horror device, and then you don't get it. It's like, okay, but this is what we'll do. We're going to throw her dead body out the window.
I do enjoy how random Mary Lou's murder streak is, because you're right. She should be targeting just the principal and maybe, I guess, the priest.
Right.
But she ends up just mowing through these teenagers that are just acquaintances of Vicki.
Right. Acquaintances / personalities that remind her of the people that were, like, being petty to her or in her. See, that's another thing too, because if we think about Mary Lou's personality, which we really don't get to see except for the beginning and the end, and then however it is translated through Vicki's performance, is that she definitely is a psycho narcissist where everything is against her. She's a victim, this and that, and that's why she acts out the way she does. Or she's just that way. She gets a rise out of people and then takes it personally when they don't want to be around her or they want to ostracize her. How dare you? Like, it's such a narcissistic tendency, but it plays into why she wants to be the prom queen so bad and why she wants to take the people out that didn't allow her to have that moment. Instead, she got burnt to a crisp.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, and you brought up Carrie, and how can we not bring up Carrie, of course, with a movie like this? But I love the fact that Mary Lou is kind of like, well, what if Carrie wasn't the villain and it really was the bitch?
Like, what if Nancy didn't get her moment and she was like, yeah, right.
Exactly. It's like taking the mean girl thing all the way up to the point where she has to just kill everyone. I love that idea.
And it's not sympathetic or apologetic at all. It's not like in Jennifer's Body, right? Where we are supposed to have an empathy towards that character. In this one, she is just that way, and we are just going along for the ride, and that's perfect. I don't mind it when there has to be a moral compensation in horror movies, and they choose not to do it. In fact, I like it better, kind of like the Terrifier movies. It's like, we're just going to show you some violent shit for 2 hours, and if you like it, you like it. If not, you'll walk out.
Yep.
Fine, hit me, hurt me. I want you to hurt me.
Yeah, sure.
Like, I'm sure you and I have seen so many just watered down, tame horror movies in our time that when we see something that dares to do something different and not conform to like the commercial aspect of it, you just got a fan. That's my opinion.
I completely agree. Just give me something different. Just try. Just try to give me something different, and I will usually appreciate it simply because of that. It doesn't have to be a great movie for me to get on board with what you're doing.
All right. So this leads us to like the taboo moment in the film, and I want your opinion on it because I've varied on opinions on this. So this is why I think that Vicki and Mary Lou are in a symbiotic relationship like Venom is, right? With Tom Hardy, where they both are functioning with each other's psyche, but now they have new abilities. And there's a moment in the movie where Vicki essentially seduces her dad and is making out with them.
Okay, go ahead. No, that's fine.
That's where it ends up.
I don't want to jump in right now. I know I'll have my time to speak. Go ahead. Sorry.
That's how it ends up, right?
Yes.
There is a makeout moment with her dad. Now, when mom walks in and realizes what she's doing and essentially ruins the marriage and she's a demon, I always knew you were terrible, blah, 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 blah. Do you think that was a symbiotic moment between the two where it's like, I really hate my mom, and then she's communicating with Mary Lou and Mary Lou's like, well, I've got an idea and we're going to do this because you would never do it on your own, but you're Mary Lou now. I feel like there's a dual motive there where Mary Lou is just going to do Mary Lou shit, but Vicki also hates mom, and like the two of them, that way it kind of takes the responsibility off of Vicki's shoulders. But I don't know, like I feel like there's a deeper part of that scene more than just the shock factor. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I really think that the interaction with her mother, or the murdering of her mother, I guess she's dead. I'm not sure. She got blown through a door.
She got blown through the door.
It never gets wrapped up like, and my mom's dead at the end of the movie or something. That is a real, like, stand up and cheer part of the movie for everyone, because that woman is the true villain of this film. I mean, Mary Lou is, of course, but I think that's kind of saying, okay, well, there's all these poor innocent bystanders getting killed, and that's the one that I think you can kind of root for.
Right. Well, because like there are the sub-villains. There's mom, there's Kelly.
Yeah, but Kelly's death is not, I mean, it's barely a death. Like it barely, what does she get? She gets run through with like a big neon squiggle or something. It's a blink and you miss it moment of a movie. And that death should have been more impactful.
And it's not that she had hate for anybody. She just really wanted to be prom queen.
Well, she does talk shit on her poor friend Jess.
It's true.
That's where I think Vicki says, shut your fucking mouth or something.
Yeah,
and that's where she turns. Like, that's the first inkling that we get that maybe Vicki's not Vicki. Or, hey, at that point, maybe it is Vicki and she's just had enough of this girl.
Right. Like I said, symbiotic relationship.
The scene with her father is one where I don't know. I'm a little torn because I don't know that it's necessary. I don't know that we need that to then have that conflict with her mother. I don't know if it's that this poor actor was like, I have nothing to do. I'm just sitting at a table every scene. I have nothing to say. Can you give me a scene with something to do? I'm not really sure what's going on there. And especially after the interaction with that horse, it just feels kind of tacked on right after that. Also, they both seem really into it. Like, that's the thing. She doesn't seduce this man. She just basically kisses her dad, makes out with him, and by the end, he is on board 100%.
And it's just weird. Maybe I'm just in a weird state of mind because I've been watching a lot of movies lately for the podcast, and I just keep coming across like a similar theme of these movies. So, like, for example, a couple weeks ago, we did The Secret of My Success, where Michael J. Fox just keeps sleeping with his aunt, even though he knows he just keeps sleeping with her. And I'm like, I forget, like, borderline incest was kind of funny back in the day. And then, of course, I'm the idiot that brought Blame It on Rio to the show because I was like, we need to trash this movie. And it was even worse than I'd remembered. And then Poison Ivy. We just watched Poison Ivy. And again, you've got Tom Skerritt and Drew Barrymore that focuses more on the age gap thing. But yeah, that's like a taboo that I feel like we've already gone so far in certain films in the 80s that they just had to make it a little bit more. Like, and I agree with you. Like, that scene didn't have to exist at all unless you really just want to get rid of the mom, and you could have gotten rid of the mom in any way.
For any reason.
For any
reason whatsoever. Right. She just stands in front of the door. That's the end of her. I will say, and not that what you said was an unfair comparison, but boy, compared to those other movies, this was just a simple scene. Those other movies, that is the movie.
That's the movie. It like builds on that theme, right? 100%.
That's really, man, blame it on Rio. Yikes. If people are listening and you've never seen it, please don't ever watch that movie.
Yeah, don't watch it. That's what we say in our review for it. It'll be coming out in like a week or so. So anyway, actually no, because this is October. It came out a while ago. Okay. All right. So, we're not going to give away the whole ending, of course. I don't like to spoil endings of movies. Sure. But, in the prom scene, there's a lot of great stuff going on. And that is where I feel like the Sam Raimi kind of has come in, where we do have a really great scene where we have a demon birth, essentially. And the effects of that. Oh. We're so good. I'm like, this is a low budget movie, but this is a very impressive effect. And it's not Tom Savini doing it. These are like these just Canadian guys making horror films. And I was so impressed by the believability of these practical effects, especially in that scene. It's like worth the price of admission alone for the most part.
It really is. And just the amount of time you spend with it and the amount you actually see it.
It's not
it doesn't
quick
seem
cut.
that they're cutting around it or anything like that. I mean, you're in there, you're witnessing basically, like you said, the birth of some sort of skeleton of a human being that then reconstitutes. It's phenomenal. Like you said, it's worth the price of admission. And I do find it kind of funny that just a little bit before this, we kind of saw a very bizarre electrocution scene.
It was very bizarre.
All right, that's not as great.
I liked it. It reminded me of something from a Stuart Gordon movie for sure.
Right.
But going to references again, like watching that birthing scene, essentially, it took me straight to Constantine. I was like, that's like the demon birth in Constantine. Like, I'm not saying that Francis Lawrence watched this film and it's like, oh, I want it to look like that. But goddamn, it does look a lot like that. And the, let's say, rebirth demonic version of Mary Lou, great makeup, great performance. Like, I have no idea why this movie has been slept on for the last 30, 40 years. It's just so damn good.
I would be shocked if people in the horror community, filmmakers who, basically make their careers on these films, on those types of films, don't watch this and don't talk about it. I would be shocked, and I'm not saying that people should corner these people and suddenly ask them, did you take this? Did you steal this from Mary Lou? They can be like Tarantino and never admit to half the stuff, pretend you've never seen The Bride Wore Black. Okay, Tarantino, I don't buy that. But anyway, but I would be shocked if people in the industry don't talk about this when they're just sitting around. It would shock me. Like the general audience hasn't seen it. People, you just run into, they haven't seen it. But people that know what they're doing, people that understand good filmmaking, people that understand great special effects, I'm sure they've all seen this.
I think one of the ways I've been kind of looking at cross comparisons of who's watching what and what group and what demographic, right? I think the younger people are discovering this movie. And the reason why I say that is because when I get onto IMDb and I look at this, it has 7.9 thousand rates and reviews, right? Not terribly bad. But if I go and look at Letterboxd, it's got 20,000, which is relatively high for a film. Letterboxd is more of like, I'm going to say a millennial and younger platform. And IMDb is for like maybe our age, older millennial and older. So I think it's the younger ones that are watching it and discovering it. And it's been on Tubi for like 5 years.
Yeah,
so
right, exactly.
It's one of those things where it's like, okay, you watch a Nightmare on Elm Street film or you watch a Hills Have Eyes or something and it pops up in the recommends. I'm telling you, man, Tubi's algorithm for recommends, I may as well have programmed it because it knows. It
Oh, I'm
knows
shocked. Yeah.
the shit that like it's like when I'm talking and my iPhone all of a sudden shows me a bunch of shit that I want to buy.
Yeah.
Tubi's doing the same thing. It knows what I'm thinking, and some of my best first watches were from its recommends.
I agree. I'm not going to argue with you there. Tubi's amazing.
Yeah, we love Tubi. I'm so done. I'm so done with the prescription, the subscription plans.
Oh yeah.
They're bullshit.
If
Tubi, Pluto,
I hold on to
Freebie.
those, I hold on to them because I have kids. The moment my kids don't watch anything on Disney, I could not drop that faster.
Oh, that was my first to go.
Yeah, no, I don't care about Star Wars. I haven't cared about Star Wars since I was like 12 years old. I'm done. I'm out. That's the only thing that may be mildly interesting to me. Nothing. Nope. See ya.
Awesome. So any last words on Mary Lou before we end the conversation?
No, I think I would just say if you're listening and you have slept on this, please check it out. Like you said, it's on Tubi. And one thing we didn't talk about, Michael Ironside, just Ironsiding the hell out of his role in this. He's always a welcome presence in anything that he's in. I love the role that he's playing in here. I do find it kind of sweet, like his weird friendship with this priest that's sort of like their high school friendship rekindling. It's kind of super fun. I find it hilarious that the casting of him younger, they just found a guy with a receding hairline. And I was just like, that's really funny. One thing that this movie does that bothers me, and I understand a lot of movies do this, and I don't know if it's just for the slow Joes in the back. A lot of times when we meet Michael Ironside and we meet the priest and they're interacting, we have to have flashbacks of them when they were younger. Like that is so unnecessary.
Yeah, I call that hand holding, and it's probably the thing that I do talk about the most in my Siskel and Ebert podcast. Of audiences are smart enough to at least figure some things out. So when you hand hold us throughout the entire thing and use multiple examples of flashbacks or tell the same goddamn story over and over again, like, yeah, I don't need that. And I get it. But also, you're right, the receding hairline thing, and I didn't look up the film, but apparently he also played a younger version of Ironside in another movie. So they're like, hey, you like that guy? Let's get that guy again. I got to play a younger version of me. So, yeah.
Okay, that's really great, honestly.
No, like that's your closing statement's very similar to mine. Like it's a movie that I think has been slept on. I don't think it's been given enough credit for things that we've seen in modern filmmaking, and I don't think it needs credit. Like you said, we don't need to have a filmmaker come out and say, well, if I hadn't seen Prom Night 2, I would have never done this. I just recognize the fact that there is influential material here, and it's fine. Like I'm okay with people biting stuff off of it, as long as it's not an intentional ripoff from start to finish. Like, use that color palette, use that little bit of score, use that shot. Why not? Like, if in my opinion, it immortalizes films that not a lot of people have seen. And that's kind of where I do have a love-hate relationship with Tarantino. Is I love the fact that if it wasn't for him, I would not have discovered all the great films I'd seen before. But also, don't play ignorant when we've all seen these movies now, Yeah.
Can I ask you one final question about this movie? And you can either answer it, maybe you have the answer, or maybe you can speculate.
Yeah.
Why does this not have a good physical release? Why does this not have a Blu-ray? Why does it not have a 4K? Why hasn't Arrow or Vinegar Syndrome or somebody scoop this thing up and put it out? I understand sometimes rights holding, I know that's an issue. I know sometimes there are music rights issues. I don't know what's going on here, but this thing would kill if somebody put out a good package.
I agree. And I was looking for a physical copy too, and couldn't find one.
Yeah.
The best I can give you is the explanation for another favorite of mine that has not seen a physical media release since the VHS days. And that's a film by Elaine May called The Heartbreak Kid with Charles Grodin.
Oh.
So there were times where big studios were just getting bought and sold by big corporations, right? And depending on how they were sold to other big corporations, For example, like MGM being bought, and now Disney owns Fox, and all those different examples we can use. In that case, the subsidiary that was part of Paramount at one time was purchased by a beverage company, like a soda pop company.
Oh, okay.
And when they sold it, they sold everything but like this one little division because they forgot to include it in the contract. And then everyone in that company essentially died. The contract folded and it's stuck with that company. So now no one can buy it. And the people in charge are like, no, we don't care. Whatever. Let it die. Like, we're not going to go looking for the contracts or these papers and things like that. So I have a feeling it's something similar to that, where this was a Canadian production by a Canadian film company, probably got picked up by a studio, and then that studio got sold to something else, and then it just got lost in the mix. That happens a lot. It's also why they don't get pulled off of YouTube, because there's no one who cares to pull them off of YouTube.
Okay. All right. No, that's good. No, I appreciate that. And I had a feeling that might be the issue, but.
Well, you were right though about the first one. 9 times out of 10, it's music. Like 9 times out of 10, it's music.
No, my wife is such a huge Beverly Hills 90210 fan, and she watches. I think they have a channel on Tubi or Pluto or something like that.
It's on Pluto.
All of the music is swapped out. Like it's crazy. But I have a VHS of this, and that's all I have. I can't even watch it now. I don't even have a VCR anymore.
All right, I did not give up my VCR. Okay. And if I see one, I buy one. Get on Facebook Marketplace. People don't know what they have. They're trying to sell them for $5. Like,
right.
You can find them. All right, Doug, this was a fantastic conversation. You're an amazing guest. I'm so glad to finally have you on the show. I hope you come back. And we can just keep talking about 80s horror, 80s movies, whatever. But at the end of the day, everyone go watch Prom Night 2. And with that, let's give you an opportunity to plug your show, your socials, and where people can find you and all the things you've got coming up. We're in October now, so if you can see that far in the future.
I wish I could see that far in the future. I can't. I'm sorry. I know. I planned it out. I have a list. For the next year. It's not on this laptop, so I can't even pull it up. But anyway, Good Times, Great Movies, wherever you get podcasts. And we're on all the socials, so just find us there. My wife and I did a podcast that has ended. It was called Shits and Giggles, where we went through every episode of Schitt's Creek. So you can check that out as well. And I do guest appearances all over the place. If people are dumb enough to have me on their show, I'll show up on your show. Antonio, thank you so much. And I am thrilled to come back anytime, talk about anything.
Fantastic. Definitely have you back. You can also find links to his stuff in my Cultworthy Partners page on the cultworthy.com. And please like, review, rate, subscribe, 5 stars, all the things we ask you to do. Do it for me, do it for Doug. And Doug, I'll see you later.
All right.